In 2009, when the Zimbabwe dollar had been wiped out by hyperinflation, authorities then decided to dollarize the economy. 14 years later, as Zimbabwe continues towards de-dollarization, the market appears to have spoken, and it has spoken emphatically. Good evening, I'm Guthrie Mnyuki, and welcome to VANTAGE. Tonight on the program, as always, we have our experts in economics, a former member of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe Monetary Policy Committee, businessman, Mr. Eddie Cross. Mr. Cross, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be back.
And compliments of the new year.
Thank you very much.
Belatedly.
Thank you very much.
In my introductions, I spoke about the Zimbabwe dollar again playing second fiddle to the US dollar because it appears the market has spoken and has self-redollarized the economy. But I don't want to go there first. I would like to start with the monetary policy statement of the governor, Dr. John Mangudya, which was unveiled last week. There were quite a number of significant things there. For starters, the revised rates, the retention rates. What impact do they have on businesses?
Well, the retention rate refers to the proportion of foreign earnings of individual companies that have to be relinquished to the Reserve Bank. And the Reserve Bank buys that foreign exchange at an exchange rate. At the moment, the exchange rate used by the Reserve Bank is the interbank market rate, which changes daily. And currently it stands at about 860 to 1. So what happens essentially is companies in the retail sector, the wholesale sector, who are being paid in US dollars, their sales in US dollars, their proceeds, the US dollar proceeds, have 20% of that used to have to be relinquished to the Reserve Bank in return for a payment in RTGS dollars. As far as exporters are concerned, it was 40%. You relinquish 40% of your foreign earnings, and you got Zimbabwe dollars in return. And what the governor has done, he's done a complete review of that whole sector, and it actually has had will have a substantial impact on the private sector. There were many exemptions given. For example, mining companies producing additional production. Let's say a mining company was producing 600 kgs of gold a year, and they produced another 200 by investing in the gold mine. There were no retentions on the 200 new kgs that were sold. And at the Victoria Falls exchange, a new investor that came together was exempted from these retentions. He was allowed to keep 100%. Now, all of that has been swept aside. And the governor has now announced a unified retention rate for all transactions. He's reduced the rates from 20% to 15% on domestic transactions in hard currency, which is the great majority of transactions. And he's reduced the rate on export proceeds from 40% to 25%. Now, these are very significant. But in reality, given the previous exemptions and the mixture and so on, he actually hasn't changed the basic retention rate. Before these changes, he was getting about 23% of the total foreign earnings in the country were going through the Reserve Bank. Now it'll be, I don't know, probably much about the same. 25 and 15, it'll probably be much the same. So, but the Minister of Finance has said that his intention is to further reduce the retentions, leaving more foreign exchange in the private sector. And I think all of us in the economy would welcome that because this forced liquidation of foreign exchange at an artificial exchange rate is extremely damaging. It affects the bottom line of most companies. It discourages investment. But what concerns me perhaps most of all is the fact that the governor can make these dramatic changes overnight. with his signature, a letter. And it's immediately binding on everybody. And no consultation. The MPC met and they made this decision. And I think cleaning up this whole mess was a good idea. But I would have hoped that there would have been more consultation, particularly with new investors and with companies that have invested heavily. For example, the platinum companies are currently doubling production. And part of that motivation for that was, in fact, to achieve this higher retention of foreign earnings. So anyway, that's what he's done. It's done. We've got to live with it. But it will have an impact on new investment, and it will have an impact on companies that are currently expanding production. I think they're committed themselves now. I don't think they can stop the process, but it will reduce the incentive for further production development.
Sure. And another significant issue within the MPS, the revelations that almost 80% of the local transactions are now in US dollars. Again, we are told that almost 80% again of the deposits are also in US dollars. What does this signify insofar as Zimbabwe's plan to de-dollarize the economy by 2025 is concerned?
Well, I was in business in 2008 when we were supposed to be trading in Zimbabwe dollars, and we weren't. I don't think for the last 3 years, 87, 88, 80, I didn't trade in local currency at all in my business. And that was true of the whole country. We abandoned the local currency. By 2008, by the beginning of 2009, the market had dollarized. It doesn't matter what the government did. The market had dollarized. So when Chinamasa announced that we could finally trade in what he called a multi-currency environment, and that was in February 2009, when he announced that, in fact, the de facto situation on the ground was that it was already done. The situation today, in my view, the informal sector is almost 100% foreign, US dollars. And the informal sector today in some sectors is 70% of the economy. It's the majority. It mightn't be true overall, but in some sectors it's 70%. That's what the retail trade tell me. You know, big manufacturers tell me 70% informal sector, 30% to the formal sector through the supermarkets. So if the MPC says that 80% of the formal sector is dollarized, overall the national dollarization is probably closer to 90% or more. In fact, I would say today that in economic terms, the local currency is virtually dead. And
we'll come to that.
Yeah.
We are not yet dead on this program. We're very much alive. We'll come back and deal with that in the second segment. Please don't go away. We'll be back after this short break. Welcome back to the second segment of this week's Vantage. And on the program tonight, we have Mr. Eddie Cross discussing the recent monetary policy statement. Before we went for the break, Mr. Cross, we were talking about the impact of the rise in US dollar transactions in the economy and the deposits, and what this will have on Zimbabwe's plan to have fully de-dollarized by 2025. And you were saying to me, that means the Zim dollar is dead. How dead is the Zim dollar dead?
Well, the PMR, the parallel market rate today is 1100, 1150 to 1. And if you go into a retail shop pretty much anywhere, and you look at I bought a cup of coffee this morning for a couple of friends. The rate was 1100 to 1 in the coffee shop. If I'd paid with my local card, I would have paid 3,300 local dollars for a cup of coffee. If I paid US, it would have cost me $3. And that's pretty much the situation throughout. People are still accepting local payments, but at these very, very high exchange rates. The Reserve Bank is trying to control that with a form of price control. Last week, they froze the bank accounts of a number of major corporates, some of the biggest trading companies in the country, because they were trading at a higher rate than the interbank market rate. They're allowed to trade 10% above, but they were doing more than that. The reality is that if a business doesn't run itself at the market price, the real market price $1,100, not $860, they'll go bust. They can't trade. And so this is a form of price control. We know from our history that price controls do not work. In fact, they can be extremely disruptive. And so I personally don't think that this is helpful at all. And I don't think it'll save the dollar. Observers in Harare are saying it'll be 3,001 by the end of the year. I think that's conservative. I don't think there's any chance of a reduction in inflation levels in the local currency. But the reality is here is that the real inflation rate is probably below 10% because of the majority of transactions being in US dollars. I mean, in US dollar terms, you can buy stuff here cheaper than you can buy. I was in Mozambique last week. I went into a supermarket and I wandered around. The prices are 20-30% above here in Medicash. But the Medicash,
which is their local currency.
Yeah, the local currency. The Medicash in the bank is 62 to 1 to the US dollar. On the street, it's 65, 67. In Zimbabwe, you've got this crazy situation where our currency, which should be much stronger, in Zambia, the kwacha is now stronger than the rand. So what's wrong with us? What's wrong with us is the system.
So I was going to ask you, so how do we resolve this issue? Because we've spoken about this issue for a very long time. How do we resolve this issue? Should we now just say, okay, fine, let's just embrace the US dollar because the market is self-dollarized? Or should we say, listen, we have to abandon one of the currencies and stick to one?
Let me tell you something about the GNU. The GNU started in 2009, ended in 2013. In that period of time, the revenue to the state grew by 70% per annum. 70%, not 7%, 70. Signaling a very rapid recovery in the economy. I mean, the changes were dramatic overnight in 2009. But in that period of time, what was very interesting, the proportion of goods in our stores that were manufactured in Zimbabwe did not change. In other words, we were importing what we were consuming.
Sure.
And the reason for that was that because we were dollarized and our domestic manufacturers were not competitive. And in fact, because foreign currency was freely available in Zimbabwe amongst in the region, we became a dumping ground for every manufacturer in every part of the region. South Africa, I can remember buying goods from Kenya, from Zambia, that I had never bought in the past. My family gave me some soap, which used to be manufactured in Bulawayo by United Refineries, as a present because it was my favorite soap. Where did it come from? Kenya. And and then when Mtuli introduced the Zimbabwe dollar, the recovery rate in the domestic economy, in the productive sector, was dramatic. So that today, 60%, 60, maybe 65% of what you see in a supermarket is manufactured here.
Sure.
Now that's created jobs. In 22, we were creating 10,000 jobs a month. So you're creating jobs, you're seeing growth, and if we abandon our own currency, that is what's going to happen here. I had a meeting the other day with some major businessmen, 35 of them. I was with Mtuli, and he had breakfast with these guys. These were all owners of businesses, not managers, owners. And the two messages were, one, the price control is destructive, and two, smuggling is destroying our businesses. Because today, the informal sector, the smugglers, can bring into this country whatever they like. They don't pay duty, they don't pay VAT, it's cheaper, it's very fast. If I order something from South Africa, it's 48 hours. And it's 20, 30, 40% cheaper than the local product. So that is what is happening. And I was director of a shoe company in Bulawayo. We couldn't compete with imports on the street because there was no VAT, there was no tax, no company tax, no border duties were being paid, and they were flooding the market.
So in other words, whilst the generality of Zimbabweans would welcome full use of the Zimbabwe dollar in the economy, it has serious ramifications on their jobs as their companies will be rendered uncompetitive.
Correct. If we dollarized.
Yes.
So I think that when the minister announced that we were going to be allowed to use the US dollars until 2025, I think that was a very poor decision.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Please join us after this short break. Welcome to the final segment of this week's Vantage. If you've just joined us tonight on the program, we are discussing the monetary policy statement that was unveiled last week by the governor of the central bank, Dr. John Mangudya. And tonight to discuss that with me is Mr. Eddie Cross. And before we went for the break, Mr. Cross, you were talking about that whilst the generality of Zimbabweans would want to have the US dollar as the currency of choice in the economy, it will have serious ramifications on the operations of the local companies because cheap imports will flood the market.
That's correct.
So, on one hand, we have a market that is re-dollarized. On the other hand, we have a Zimbabwe dollar that is actually on the ropes, which should be the lifeline to the local production companies.
That's right.
So, which is the way to go here? Because the companies are so important.
Yeah. When I was on the MPC, we adopted a roadmap for de-dollarization. At the time, the rates on the US dollar were more reasonable. Inflation was down. It looked very positive. And what we said was it's critical for us to move as quickly as possible to de-dollarize the economy for this very reason, that our own local currency is critical to us controlling the monetary and fiscal policies of the country. Because if we dollarize, we lose control of our monetary policy. Our monetary policy is dictated in Washington, D.C. So we adopted that. When we publicized it, there was a lot of opposition from the elements in our society who benefit from this chaos. Speculators, traders, guys who make money on arbitrage. Okay? And the policy was dropped. The plan was dropped. I think that was the beginning of the demise of the Zimbabwe dollar. Now, if you want the Zimbabwe dollar to come back, I mean, I can remember when the Zambian kwacha was worthless. I can remember when the metikash was a joke. Local people wouldn't use it at all. You had to have US dollars. Today, if you travel to Zambia, travel to Mozambique, they don't want US dollars. They want their own currency. That is where we should be. And it's an issue of policy. It's an issue of allowing us to trade foreign exchange freely in the marketplace. And we've got a balance of payment surplus. There is no reason, technically, no reason at all why the Zimbabwe currency is not the strongest currency in the region. Because
last year we had record, exports earnings.
And this year the same. We've got a big balance of payment surplus. There's no shortage of foreign currency in Zimbabwe. You can see our stores are full. There's no shortages. Our filling stations are full. You don't have any shortages here at all. But we need to translate that into a decent exchange rate mechanism. And that's what our neighbours, all our neighbours have done. Somalia did that 2 years ago. And Somalia has a stable exchange rate and low inflation.
So, in other words, we just have to have the single use of our Zimbabwe dollar.
That's what I would. That's what I would do. I would go back to the Zimbabwe dollar.
Do you think that will sell through, insofar as policymaking is concerned?
And I'll tell you what I would do. I would say it doesn't matter what the rate is. Doesn't matter what the rate is. I mean, the yen has devalued by 40%. The yen, the Japanese yen, has devalued against the US dollar by 40% in the last 8 months or so, because the Japanese are afraid to lose their competitiveness. So they devalue the yen. Now that means higher inflation in Japan, it means increased costs of imports and so on, but it means their exports are more competitive. And it means in Japan today, you'll struggle to sell a foreign good in Japan because of this. Now, we don't have that control. So effectively, we are handing over our job creation capacity to our neighbours. And that's what's happening. That's what's happening. Imports are pouring into this country. At Beitbridge, you just see 1,000 trucks a day are crossing the bridge at Beitbridge. 1,000 30-ton trucks a day. A day. You know, these are vast quantities. At Forbes Border Post, it is the same. And so we've once again become a dumping ground for the region. The people who support this system because they're making money from it, there are many people in this country who do not produce anything, who do not have a job, but they're driving big cars and have expensive homes and expensive lifestyles. How are they making money? They're making money by trading in our currency, destroying our currency deliberately, because they every turn, every day. I mean, the currency is depreciating at 5% per week. It's the highest devaluation in the world. Okay, but it means nothing because it only affects our local currency. And I think that if we don't get on top of this, they all say to the president and to the minister of finance, if you tackle this problem, you'll affect your prospects for the election. I don't believe that. I believe if we adopted a proper, and we know how to do it. Mthuli knows exactly what needs to be done. Exactly. If we did it, this would be a different country tomorrow morning, so, as it was in 2009.
So you say those who are against the president and the Mthuli actually supporting our dollar. We're saying that this might cost you elections. And you don't believe that.
I don't
so
believe
do you
that.
believe that if the president and Mthuli they work around this issue and promote the Zimbabwe dollar, they can actually win the elections?
I think because I think the changes here would be immediate. I think the value of the local currency would strengthen immediately. In fact, if you speak to dealers, money dealers, real boys, the boys in the bureaus and so on, the guys at the coalface, and you say to them, if we had a free market for foreign exchange here, what would happen? They said they can't even estimate what the dollar would be, because it would collapse. Do you remember when we made major changes during my time in the MPC in monetary policy? Do you remember what happened to the open market? It collapsed.
Yes.
We'd have the same situation. Our own currency. And everybody who earns RTGS, I earn RTGS because I'm a pensioner. My pension is paid in RTGS, not paid in US. Every one of us would benefit enormously from that. And that includes the majority of Zimbabweans.
We always want enormous benefits, both at a personal level and at a national level. And on this program, we always benefit enormously from your insights, the economic insights. I would like to thank you again, Mr. Cross, for having made time to be with us on this week's program. You are always welcome. You are a permanent feature on economic issues. Thanks for having made time to be with us this week.
Thank you very much.
In tennis or football, at times if things don't go your way, when they seem destined to be going your way, you always cry foul, we did not get the rub of the green. The Zimbabweans, ordinary Zimbabweans, companies, they are all yearning for the rub of the green. When will this happen? Thanks for having made time to be with us on this week's Vantage. I'm Guthrie Manyoki. Good night and pleasant viewing.